And I think we're live, Eric. Hi.
Hello.
My name's Simon Gibson. I'm the founder of World Speech Day. And World Speech Day is a day to celebrate speeches and speech making with live public events all around the world. As part of the celebrations this year, we're also hosting a number of live stream broadcasts. And our first live stream broadcast is Rhetoric Remix, in which we're going to hear from speakers all across the globe on their take on rhetoric and bringing some new aspect to the discussions about rhetoric to us and to the art of public speaking. So I think it's going to be a fascinating couple of hours, not least because we've got some very eminent speakers, but we've got an enormous range of speakers from different cultures and different geographies. Anyway, this isn't about me particularly, but about the great people, the guests who have agreed to come on. And our first speaker is Erik Menning from Finland, who is going to be speaking on visual rhetoric, a fascinating area. And it's a great pleasure to have Erik with us. He's a senior lecturer at a university in Finland. I hope I've got that right, Erik.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you. It's very, very nice to be invited to this event, assuming anyone is listening, of course, but I'm sure that there will be many of you out there in the world. And I'm very happy to imagine that we get close in a way now that we have a special time in our world history where closeness is a problem. I'm sitting here in the middle of the Baltic Sea. I'm a senior lecturer at the Åland University of Applied Sciences, and Åland is an archipelago right between Sweden and Finland. So Sweden is here, Finland is there, Åland is there. And as you can imagine, then we are in a special situation where we can look into both of those cultures, but we are very much in the periphery of each one of them. And this situation of being in the periphery is something that has started to interest me since a couple of years ago. So I'm going to talk about that today. And I'm going to include then visuals, because I am a true believer in visuals. As a senior lecturer here, I've been struggling for 27 years at this little university to present complex reality to students of varying degrees of interest in what I'm talking about, because I'm in social sciences and languages. So it is sometimes a challenge to feel that you can reach the audience so that you can believe that there is an understanding. So anyway, this is my background, and I'm going to be talking about peekaboo.
It's great stuff, Erik.
So what is it like to be in the periphery? Well, it is a dream that many people have had, to be totally invisible. And all those opportunities that would bring. But don't worry about that, dear listeners, because you are totally invisible. Many people don't see you and have no idea that you exist. So just be happy, because you can do whatever you want to and nobody's going to care or notice. But this is, of course, only one side of the coin. You also know that nobody sees you, nobody cares, nobody understands. You know, in the English language, when you say that you understand, you say. So being in the margin, being in the periphery, it's not a place where you get understood. The opposite, the center, is a very interesting place. People click on the most interesting things. So Some people have billions of clicks and followers, whereas most of us don't have more than our closest circle of friends and family, or not even that. So that is a bit of being invisible. Now, if you are in a university just like me and trying to explain things, well, then there is plenty of stuff like this here. This is a PhD thesis, and it looks like this, you know. And this is very well written, I am sure, by my friend who wrote this. She is very clever, but I'm pretty sure not very many people have read that stuff. Fortunately, there is in many scientific texts, there are figures and visual elements. They are not really interesting or beautiful, but they are useful anyway. For instance, in social sciences, this is very, very useful. It's a sociogram or a sociographic. And here, the diagram shows people and their interactions and who wants to be with who. And this is something that everybody, every person on earth can understand, because we have all been in our family, in our circle of friends, and in our school groups. And we know that this is the way it is. Some people are big circles. They are in the center, they are popular. And some people are really, really tiny in the periphery. Nobody sees them. Perhaps they're fine with that. You know, we shan't say anything about what other people feel, but it's not fair, really. So you have people like President Trump and Prime Minister Johnson, who are in each little circle here. This is Northwestern Europe. This is the Western Hemisphere, and this is Asia. Maybe you see different colors, and these colors can be called cultural spheres if you want to, because the communication between them isn't really good. There's a lot of suspicion, which is only a result of the lack of communication, obviously. Anyway, these colors, they correspond to the colors of this map here, the lingua francas of the world. So in case you are able to communicate in one of these, for instance, the green one, that would be English, then you can communicate easily with the countries where the color is the same as yours. So the cultural spheres correspond a little to this. You have the Arabic, the blue, the light blue. You have the Chinese, the dark blue, etc. So we know that communication could be a lot better there between us. And what I'm interested in here is the, let's say now, let's put it this way. It's not really fair, but you know, it is a system. It's nobody's fault, but it is a system which is, you know, in the small family, it's not complicated. But if you take a town or a country, then it gets very complex. And a lot of people think that they can say things about this. So the problem today in the world is this. Complexity is not something which populism can successfully deal with. And as an educator, the challenge is enormous then. How can we as educators popularize science without becoming populist? Well, first of all, not putting down the weak people, the people in weak positions in the social system is a good first step. But I think we can do better than that. And young people today, they like to see things like this. Let me put this really close here. And I'm very, very keen to think that you can see this. It is a picture that I have actually stolen from somewhere on the internet. I just typed labyrinth or maze, And then I saw this, and I thought it was so beautiful. It's a fascinating picture of complexity, and you can also see here in the outskirts it's darker, and in the center it's very light. Big city, bright lights, and out there in the countryside is dark and cold. I can show you another. Well, this is not a diagram. This is art. This is picture of. It's a metaphor for the human condition, and it's fascinating to everybody because everybody can imagine what it is like to be inside of a maze like this. Not seeing it from above like you do now, but being in there in the halls and corridors with locked doors and a bit scary corners to turn around, and darkness, and some people are nice that you meet. They can be called gatekeepers. Maybe they can let you in through a door and help you and show you how to do things, or they can also close the passage for you so you won't be able to come in. And I suppose most people tend to be attracted towards the bright center here. Not everybody, but most people do that. And the people who are there in the center, they have struggled maybe to be there. Some people have been born, if they are very rich, for instance, or if they're very beautiful, or if they are very clever, or if they have very good contacts, then it's much easier for them to reach that position. And speaking of languages, if they speak the languages that are helpful to reach where these attractive positions, that helps a lot. I have managed to learn to speak English, and that helps me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been invited here today, right, Simon? So anyway, we all have these.
Tolerated you anyway, Eric, but
thank you. I could possibly switch to another language, but I won't do that. Anyway, so I was going to say that these superpowers that we all have. Let me think. Let me show you here the superpowers. Yeah, here they are. This is from a computer game. You can go up to a higher level if you have a lot of superpowers, and these are a few examples. So young people today, they love to play computer games. At least men do that. Let me fold this here. So, well, I need to put it this way. Men like to do this, and that's all fine. Men are very more interested, or is a bit more interested in visuals statistically than what girls and women are. So they spend a lot of time in these computer games, and play among children is a good preparation for real life. So we shouldn't be negative towards that. So if you achieve higher results in these superpowers, you can actually then hope to be able to get closer to the higher levels in the game, which would be then the center. So that's where the power is. That's where the money is. That's where the beautiful people are. That's where the smart people go. They don't stay back in their villages. And ambitious people, they love to compete, and to try to achieve stuff, and they're not afraid. Like many people. Most people are reluctant to go into fighting, but if you have to do that, so the people in the center, they are really, really powerful and ruthless many times. It is a bit like you can imagine. I love this picture too. I love pictures. You can see this is a galaxy, possibly not our own galaxy, because who would take a picture of that? But anyway, we on Earth, we are not in the center here because it would be too hot, right? We are somewhere out in the darkness, in a far arm of the galaxy, and that's fine for us. But the center is attractive. That's really, really a place for tough people to go. Or you take this, a hurricane, right? You know, the temperature there is not the problem in the center. And in the center, it's said to be very calm, but the pressure, the difference in air pressure is really the problem. So you have a violent storm system around the center, and it's very, very dangerous to go in there. And the inequality of the pressure between the center and the periphery is the problem. So inequality is the thing. So let's go back to the this one here. You have the problem here is inequality, and if we want to be good people, we want to help those who need help, and not stop them from trying to reach a better position in life. If you take Europe, for instance, you have the periphery where I am, and you have the center where, well, Great Britain isn't really the center, but you know, France and Germany, Holland and Belgium, they are the center. You can see that on this visualization of Europe here. The communication is intense in the light areas. Well, it's not a good picture for showing this way. So anyway, so in the outskirts of Europe, or in any social system, then we have people who are disadvantaged, and actually then, as I just pointed out, they are invisible. This word, by the way, I like it because, you know, it has 6 I sounds in it. Invisibility. It's a very special word. So let's see now, the power of the center, it affects everybody in the system. Just like this drop here. Where does it fall? Well, it falls in the center, right? But who is affected? Yes, everybody is affected here in the system. And you know, we can't really stop the center from moving us as we sit in the periphery of the system. So as you have seen here, I show many pictures. These pictures, I believe, are interesting to look at. They are beautiful, and they are art, expressions of art in a way. They are selected by human beings for being interesting and beautiful to look at. They are not diagrams, they are not maps, but everybody can relate to these pictures because we have these experiences with us as human beings from our small context. We can see that these systems, these forms are being repeated on a larger scale in a very complex world. And my question now to my audience is this populism that I'm talking about now, or is this helpful for people to achieve a useful understanding of complexity in today's world? I believe so, and I hope that there is somebody out there who doesn't believe that, and that we can have a fight here on World Speech Day. Oh yes, another metaphor. This one is very important too. You know, the body, the human body. People who are in advantageous positions, they believe that they are the head, and the people who are not so clever, they can do the menial tasks. they are the feet and the hands and even the stomach of the society. You know, the human body would be a picture of society then. So the people at the top, that would be the kings and the rulers and the presidents and the influencers today on in the internet. And they would be then giving signals, just like the drop of water that falls into the puddle, to that makes the rest of the body move. And they would then be superior. You know, up is always, well, almost always positive in our language. It's a metaphor in our language that is hard to get rid of. Not always up is good, because if the coronavirus infections go up, that's not good, of course. But it means more, and more is usually good. So I have a lot of pictures. I'll end with this one. That'll be another one where the center of the cake is very high up, and it has a special goodie there at the top that as a child, I always wanted to have the rose on top of the cake. And I think that it wasn't just me who wanted that. It's universal, isn't it? Well, I don't know how long I have been speaking now, but I think I have said what was the key message here that I had, and I would be happy to discuss with people if anybody wants to react to what I have said. I really hope so. That is, the token of efficiency in communication, if we can actually reach across and get feedback. So do you want to come in now, Simon?
I did. Yes, I did actually, Eric, because I'm fascinated by the notion of complexity versus populism, because it's a very, very important kind of divide. I don't want to be too glib about the times now, but the complexity of information strikes me as critical. Trying to describe a complex subject like coronavirus in its many guises, but trying to find a way that is populist. By populist, I mean something which reaches out to everybody, that people understand.
Yeah, so that's a positive.
I wonder what you thought about that, and just one kind of addition to that, whether there's a sort of a divide between intellectual and emotional communication when it comes to complexity.
Yes, but I believe that intellectual communication gets very barren and elitist for most people. And if you want to reach out to a majority of people, and if you feel that you have respect for people who are not comfortable with masses of words on masses of papers, but you can still believe that they are intelligent beings and can make wise decisions, which is really necessary if we are to believe in democracy, because these people have the right to vote, right? Then populism, as you said it now, it sounded almost like it would be something positive. But I think what I want to say is that popularizing science without becoming populist, it's like you have a Venn diagram. You have a very, very small overlap there. You have popularizing and you have populism. Oh no, I have a big overlap, but you want to stay away from that, so you don't fall into the trap of being too much generalizing. But still, people, when people understand, they see something, and this seeing is connecting the new understanding to an old pattern that they have.
And do you think images are better at communicating across the spectrum, across the darkness to light than words?
Well, I think the combination is fantastic, but a picture needs to be used in an intellectual context. but it brings with it the energy and the feelings, the emotions that you know, make the intellectual, make people have the energy to try to understand. You know, so like people say that our mind is like a sailing boat where the sails are the emotions and the intellect is the rudder, and you can't have a sailing boat without the one or the other.
Sure. Yeah. 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 Well, I'm you know, I am fascinated by it because I have for a long while tried to find a way through for kind of explaining difficult subjects, particularly science subjects.
Yes, we have that in common.
And giving that across to the spectrum such that everybody understands, because everybody needs to understand, you know, and it has to be reduced to very simple, straightforward instructions in the case of a virus or something like that.
Yes. Yeah, we have in our restrooms, as you say it, in the toilets here, we have a new kind of picture where they show how to wash our hands, and you know, I didn't understand it really. It was very complex.
Yeah.
I had to look at it for a long time before I figured it out. And you know, it was just what I already knew. It was really basic. Communication is such a challenge.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of why we're here. Well, Eric, thank you very much. I've got Tom Wright around at the moment, so please hang around with us during the broadcast.
Yeah, I had just one more thing.
Yes, of course.
Yes. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody.
Well, yes, there'll be a lot of happy Irishmen now there.
Yeah, but we're not going out. We have to.
Okay. They've closed the pubs in Ireland.
Bye-bye.
All right, well, hang around, Eric, and
sure.
I'm just going to introduce Tom.
Hi, Simon.
Oh, hello, Tom. Hello.
Hello, Tom.
Staying with us. It's World Speech Day, so we're having contributions from a whole range of different speakers. And Dr. Tom Wright is a senior lecturer in English at Sussex University in the UK. And he also heads up a fascinating initiative called Speaking Citizens, which I'd like to talk to him about, or anyway, ask him a few questions about at the end. But anyway, I think Tom is here to give us an unusual angle on rhetoric and the notion of disease in rhetoric and how disease is brought into rhetoric. I'm probably wrong on that, but anyway, it's a great pleasure to have Tom with us, and I'll let him do a little bit more of his own introduction.
Thank you, Simon. It's a real pleasure to contribute today, especially under these very difficult circumstances. I think all of us are going to have to get used to remote communication of this kind. So I think it's very effective. So I teach the history of rhetoric and speech making here in the United Kingdom. And that's quite a rare thing. It's something which isn't taught as much as it should be in universities. It's something that doesn't really have a department. It doesn't really have a discipline that it belongs to. In the United States, where I trained at graduate school, there are departments of rhetoric or communication. Here in the United Kingdom, you might study speeches in classics, you might study them in history, but you very rarely get to think about rhetoric and speech making head on. And that's what I do. And that's what my books that I publish try and help students to do. So I look back in history at old newspapers and books and diaries to discover types of speeches that people gave in the age before they were recorded. I specialize in the 19th century, the period between, broadly speaking, the American Revolution, the 1770s, through to the First World War, the speeches of the suffragettes, you might say. And like lots of the people that are speaking to you today, I believe that words have power, that by thinking carefully about how language is used, we can understand the world better. So when I'm teaching in university and in schools or in events like this, I try to teach students to understand the language and situation of historical speeches. What was going on? What was the reason behind the controversies that these speeches are addressing? And I encourage the students to think about how speeches given in the past can help us understand what's going on now. So, as Simon said, to give you an example of how I might do this, I wanted to talk about some words that we're all hearing in speeches across the world right now. Words like contagion, outbreak, panic, disease. Politicians and people in the media, leaders, are all using these words to talk about the coronavirus, and they're using them very literally. This is a dangerous time, a time of disease, a time of self-isolation, and a time of anxiety. And in the past, people have given speeches about diseases, about the AIDS epidemic in the 1980s, or about the Spanish flu of the 1910s. And what I'm interested in is, yes, speeches like this where there is a literal crisis about literal disease, but I'm just as interested in how these words are far more often used as metaphors throughout history. People making speeches will often talk about something as an outbreak that isn't actually an outbreak. They will make their listeners think of something as a threat or dangerous by linking it to disease, by making them connect it with contagion or themes and metaphors that you would associate with medicine. And I think it's really important for us to try and be aware of how these metaphors and images work. Because the key thing that I do when I teach rhetoric is to think about how metaphors and images are rhetoric. As we just saw Eric talking about the very real way in which visual rhetoric works, metaphors create visual images in the mind, and therefore they're very persuasive, and they help create images and mindsets for listeners in ways which are extremely powerful. So if I was teaching this kind of thing, if I was going to try and understand the coronavirus historically and on the level of language, I might go back into history and show my university or school classes examples of how language of outbreak, language of disease was used. So in order to help students do that, I recently published a book called Transatlantic Rhetoric. I don't know if that's in focus there. It's a book that brings together over 70 speeches that were delivered on both sides of the Atlantic, in Britain, in Ireland, in the United States, in Haiti, and in Mexico, during the period that I said that I'm an expert in. And the period, as it says on the front of the book, you probably can't see that, but it says between the American Revolution and the suffragettes. And it's a book that brings together 70 speeches from male and female activists, from political leaders, from Native Americans, African Americans, Irish nationalists, coming back to the St. Patrick's Day reference, preachers, lecturers, political radicals. These are speeches that often aren't included in the great speeches books that you might have seen before. So I've tried to do something different by bringing a wider range of people into discussion. And these aren't just speeches that we might admire now. They're speeches that are arguing for some troubling things. Some of these speeches are arguing that women shouldn't have the vote. Some of these are arguing that slavery was a good thing. Some of these are arguing that imperialism is the future. Some of these are arguing that socialism is the future. So one of the reasons that I published this book is that I think that this archive, that this collection of speeches from the 19th century can provide ways of understanding the present, so that any given day, maybe World Speech Day next year, I'd be able to choose a different theme, to be able to go back to this book and use this as a way of shedding light on the present. Today, obviously, it happens that theme is outbreak and disease. But I've deliberately structured this so that the index has lots of abstract words that you can look up and then trace throughout all of the speeches. Some of the words might be heaven, the way in which people frame a political future or a political past in terms of heavenly perfection, in terms of it being a utopia or a celestial place. Maybe ideas of sin you could look through, and how people are framing particular types of action or particular types of view as sinful. Words such as freedom, used in multiple different ways by multiple different people. And then there's imagery of blood, how especially nationalists in the American Revolution, in the attempts to overthrow British rule in Ireland or French rule in Haiti, people are using imagery of blood or using imagery of soil to talk about belonging. You can see how people use imagery of water to think about how, when you use a natural image, natural rhetoric in speeches, the kind of effects that that might have. And so it's easy for me to then look in the index here and see, yes, I do have an entry under disease. Maybe I didn't even realize that this was here, but it's very topical today. So I looked around. When I was thinking about this today, I thought, well, yes, the use of outbreak and the use of disease as a metaphor in rhetoric is a very powerful and often a very dangerous rhetorical tool. It's there in the kind of populist rhetoric that has been discussed earlier. It's there in 20th century fascist, Nazi, and other kinds of totalitarian rhetoric to talk about the encroaching threat of an outsider. It's there when talking about ideas which are alien. It's there to talk about something which needs to be shaken off, a disease of the nation or the community which can be solved through a particular political program or solution. So if I was using this book in class, there are two examples that I would go for here then. So the first is that people were talking about slavery using the word disease. So slavery in the United States in particular, the unpaid labor of Africans in particular, taken from Africa through the Caribbean into the southern states of America, continued up until the 1860s. And one of the ways in which it was stopped was by people making speeches against it. Now, you might think that people would be using disease and outbreak to think about what happened to slaves and what happened to slaves in the conditions of the American plantations. And you'd be right. Lots of the speeches in Britain by Wilberforce through to Frederick Douglass in America, they used the notion of disease as something that would inspire shame in the audiences. But actually, there was another way in which disease was used, and it's a very interesting rhetorical move. So speeches by people who supported slavery, who wanted to keep the slave system, used the phrase disease often to talk about people who were opposing it. So the very speeches that were made against slavery were described as diseased. There's a guy in this book called John Calhoun, who was a politician from the American South, who argued that those people who hated slavery, who kept on going on about slavery in their speeches and in their books, were deeply and dangerously diseased. That all of these people who were fighting against slavery were kind of like an epidemic themselves, that there was an outbreak of anti-slavery that needed to be stopped. And in the speech which I have in here, he describes slavery as a positive good and urges all of his listeners to fight against what he sees as the epidemic or the outbreak of anti-slavery. And this had real consequences. There's an image in this book. I think it's too sunny here for me to hold it up to the screen. There's an image of a lecture hall in the 1830s in Philadelphia that was burnt to the ground after a famous female lecturer gave a speech against slavery. And it's because of the rhetoric of disease, the rhetoric of outbreak, that this happened, because people saw the kind of thing that she was doing and other people who were fighting for the rights of Africans and African Americans. They were encouraged to see this as a disease, as an outbreak that needed to be stopped. Okay. So we can look back in history and see how sometimes the phrase disease can be used in an offensive and strange way. The second way in which it is used in books like this is that people were making speeches about political solutions. So one example here is the British radical socialist and novelist and graphic designer, interior designer, William Morris from London, who gives lots of speeches in England in the 1880s talking about how big business is exploiting the working class, how bosses are exploiting the ordinary people of Britain, and how they should fight back. And he uses the phrase disease of the soul to talk about how capitalism does all of this. He says that his listeners can only cure themselves of this disease by becoming socialists, by joining a political movement that would make Britain fairer, that would therefore stop the disease of capitalism. And you can see in this way, he's using this phrase disease in quite a Christian way, quite a religious way, to think about a moral contagion that can be solved through a particular belief. In this case, it's not a religious belief, it's a belief in a political solution, the solution of socialism. And so you see two ways already then in which disease was used in the past to talk about politics. How some people use disease as a metaphor for something bad that is coming, something that you don't like, something that is going viral that you want to stop. Or how some people use the word disease to show that they have an answer or a way of solving something, that there is a disease in society that only their solution offers a remedy to. So we see that this rhetoric, this metaphor, this imagery of disease, of outbreak, is always bound up with ideas of blame, always bound up with ideas of finding scapegoats or of promising easy solutions. So what I would encourage my students to do, and everyone on World Speech Day, is to think about this, to step back when we're listening to all of the speeches over the next who knows how long about coronavirus, to think about what the rhetorical meaning of some of these phrases, such as disease or outbreak, herd immunity, you might say here in the UK, what is the persuasive meaning of some of these words? Have we heard them before, historically? Can we look back at previous examples of panics or outbreaks to see how ideas have been used in positive ways or in negative ways? So it's that kind of approach to the history of rhetoric that I teach here in the United Kingdom, and which by publishing books like this, I try and encourage students to get involved in. To try and think about how words have been used in the past, and to try and be critical about the way in which they're being used right now, today. Okay. So thank you, Simon. And I'm happy to talk more about this or about the other projects which you mentioned that I'm involved in.
Well, Tom, that was absolutely a wonderful review. And I think you've given the most eloquent explanation as to why rhetoric is so important, because we all think about rhetoric as the art of speaking, but your fabulous talk was really about the role of rhetoric as well in understanding, in interpreting what is spoken in everyday discourse, not just the great speeches, but in the way that politicians and influencers talk to us and describe things as important as disease and coronavirus. So I thought that was just wonderful. And it also kind of takes one to, so why isn't rhetoric more central to the educational kind of syllabus, do you think? I mean, it was in the Middle Ages, you know, perhaps the most important element of someone's education, and now it seems to have disappeared. Well, why is that? Because it's not just about speaking, it's about understanding.
I think there are two reasons, and the first reason is that people hear the word in a very negative way. We often associate rhetoric with empty communication, with a certain glibness, or a tendency or aspiration towards manipulation. We hear the phrase mere rhetoric, we hear the phrase empty rhetoric, And we hear within that the notion that persuasive language is always to be distrusted, that it is merely a tool of manipulation, that it is merely something which is artificial, which bears very little relationship to the values which the humanities and education holds dear, that of truth, that of finding solutions. It's a way of obscuring answers as much as it is of finding a solution. And yes, clearly there is some truth to that. This is a debate which has gone back as far as the ancient philosophers, obviously.
Yeah.
So Aristotle disagreed with Plato when Plato said that rhetoric was to be distrusted. He hated it. He thought that it was something that you should only teach in the way that you would teach kung fu or judo in order to be able to fight back, because it was manipulation. Aristotle disagreed and said it was a really important way of becoming a citizen. And so that's really where I come in. So there's this tradition of thinking about rhetoric as something which is merely manipulative. But I think the second reason why it isn't taught is that we have other words which describe what rhetoric is now. When we think about the phrase communication, when we think about articulacy, when we think about effectiveness, clarity of communication, the ability to offer a summary in concise and elegant language, those are things which we don't necessarily associate with rhetoric, but rhetoric used to describe being able to give the most effective account of yourself, of your society's views, and being able to recognize how someone you're speaking to is doing the same thing, I think is a really important skill for the individual to develop their communication skills. But it's also, and this is where the project that I'm involved in at the moment comes in, it's a tool for democracy. That rhetoric isn't just about beating your opponent. It's not just about the Oxford Union or English public schools. It's not just Parliament, and it's not just a competitive sport, but it's a mode of understanding each other and the world. So I think that's something that I try to bring back through my own work here, but which is far more common in other parts of the world. I've spoken in China to groups of students who study rhetoric, and it's a big subject there. Or in the United States, where I taught for some time, it is a continuing tradition in ways that it is not in a culture in Britain, which is far more cynical about spoken communication.
Okay. Your project, Speaking Citizens, just briefly on that, does that take us to a point where you're suggesting that it's part of citizenship to be able to speak and to have your ideas shared through public speaking? And if that's the case, do we need more opportunities for public speaking events in local communities? And I don't mean kind of, ones attached to schools, but generally in the community. Do you think that would be a beneficial thing towards citizenship?
So it seems obvious that the rise of non-face-to-face communication has immense benefits. More people are communicating with more people than ever before. But I think we're all deeply aware at this stage of the digital infrastructure's life that it comes with certain costs. It comes with costs of, to use that popular phrase, civility and a degree of respect and understanding or empathy for the other. This isn't a new observation. This is one which is understood as an anxiety in cultures across the world. If there were more opportunities and ways of encouraging the skills of interpersonal communication face to face, I think we might develop a maturer and less toxic form of political discussion. So that is one of the reasons that I'm involved in this project. But the real reason is to try and understand how that can be achieved in education. And in British education, there is a phrase, a buzzword, which has been very popular and prominent since the 1960s, and it's this phrase oracy. So obviously we have literacy, how you can speak, the ability and fluency in speaking, in writing. Oracy is the opposite, so the fluency in speaking. And usually when you go to school in the United Kingdom, the end goal is to become literate, to become someone who is an excellent writer. But people have been arguing that actually what we need is, especially now in this age of a skills economy, in this age of social media, we need people who can actually speak. And often when people are making that argument in education, trying to reform education, they say it's because we would create better citizens. Now, what I'm trying to do with a team of people at the University of Oxford and Leeds is to step back from that and say, okay, that sounds really good to have a speaking citizen, but what does that actually mean? And so for the next 3 years, we're trying to think about the history of that, going back to the beginning of compulsory education in Britain and the United States, English-speaking cultures, to see, has that actually been true? Has it been the case that when people spoke more, there was more civic engagement? Our sense is that that will be true, but we want to try and find out. We want to be critical and provide a new knowledge base so that people can try and reform education in Britain, and to make this idea that we do need to speak as citizens more forcefully, so that school curriculums change, so that through events like this World Speech Day, we encourage a new culture of speech making, but also listening and speaking as something which is seen as not just about speeches about Martin Luther King or Malala or great orators, but something which is seen as a civic good and a civic skill.
Well, thanks, Tom. That's a very apt way to kind of celebrate World Speech Day and what we're at, which is, above all, the sharing of ideas and reaching out to parts of the community, to what we've termed unexpected voices, to bring forward ideas, to share them, and to take us all forward, because it isn't just residing in the elite universities that we find the great ideas are going to have breakthroughs, but in the unexpected parts of our society, which is why I think that speeches and speech making has a role to play.
Yeah.
So thanks so much for your contribution. It's been wonderful to get some of your ideas in on World Speech Day, and I'm going to pull in Mette now, who's coming from Aarhus, and who will give us another kind of Scandinavian take on rhetoric. But thank you so much, Tom, for sparing the time this morning, and it's been great listening to you. Thank you. So I'm just going to find Mette. You should be there. Hello, Mette.
Hello, Simon.
Hi. Now, Mette is a rhetorician from Aarhus in Denmark, and I believe she's going to be talking to us this morning about audiences and creating an audience persona, and how you get an audience to perform a sort of certain call to action. So it's great to have you from Aarhus, Mette, and I'm fascinated. Do give a better introduction to yourself than I have, but it's great to have you on board.
Thank you, Simon. Well, I'm not sure a better introduction is needed, but you're right. I'm from Aarhus. I'm an external lecturer in rhetoric at the University of Aarhus, and I'm very honored by your request for me to give a speech here today.
Glad to have you.
What I will talk about is that good public speaking and rhetoric in general takes into account the audience, and especially the beliefs and values of the audience. So when we prepare a speech we're about to give, we let these values and beliefs of the audience guide our speech writing, guide our invention of the persuasive arguments. That has been the rhetorical approach to speech writing for thousands of years. But during the last 100 years, intellectuals and academics have been arguing that the audience whose values and beliefs we are guided by in our speech writing are to a great extent shaped by the speech addressing them. Of course, the physical human beings exist independently of the speech. What these intellectuals have been saying is that the way the audience understands itself is to some extent shaped by or an effect by the speech that addresses it. It's a thought-provoking idea, but also a fascinating perspective if you ask me, and it can help the speaker in motivating her audience to act on behalf of the speech. It's a perspective that requires some elaboration. When we take the floor to speak publicly, we do it because we want the audience to think or act in a certain way. Maybe we want the audience to change its attitude towards something, or we want it to take action on a specific issue in the near or distant future. No matter what, every time we do public speaking, we ought to have a specific call for action, even if that action is just a mental action, such as getting a particular opinion about something. Now, the million-dollar question, of course, is how you motivate your audience to actually act on behalf of your speech. My answer is just one in many answers to that question. But what I want to emphasize here is the importance of constructing an image of the audience in your speech, an image of the audience for whom it is natural to act the way the speech calls for, and then to invite your actual audience to identify with that image and that way of action. Think about how many roles you have in your life. You might be a brother, a sister, a mom, or dad. You have a certain job. You're also a friend, and you're maybe a different kind of friend in different groups of friends. You are maybe a soccer fan and you love baking, but you also value your yoga classes very highly. You can be all these different things at the same time. And because of that, when you attend a speech, you subconsciously look for hints as to which version of yourself you should be in that very moment. Should you judge the speech as a protective mom, as a good neighbor, or as a soccer fan? What is important here is that the different roles that people have, or the different identities, calls for different kinds of action. In the role of a protective parent, you might meet everybody with distrust. But in the role as a good neighbor, you might feel called upon to help everybody in the area, even though you don't know them that well. So as a speaker, you should pay attention to the identity or the role you invite your audience to take on in your speech. By doing that, you encourage your audience to act in specific ways. An example of rhetoric that offers an audience an identity in line with the action called for is the speeches given by the Danish Prime Minister this past week, addressing the rapid growth in the number infected with the coronavirus here. In the press conferences, the PM asked the Danes to stay home for 2 weeks to prevent the virus from spreading to older and weaker fellow citizens. And the reason for that, she kept saying, was that this situation calls for a great deal of public spirit. By constantly emphasizing and repeating that need for public spirit, she offered me, as a Dane, along with all other Danes, an identity of being public spirited. And if I identify with that, I will have to act on it. So in this case, I am willing to stay home for 2 weeks and accept the amount of boredom and restlessness that will eventually show up, because I know I do it for the greater public. I show great public spirit. It would be conflicting to consider myself public spirited and still insist on going to that concert I had tickets for on Friday because I was just bored and needed some entertainment, and not to think about the consequences for my fellow citizens. But now imagine if the PM had also tried to calm the panic that arose last week at the same time as wanting us to stay home. She then could have said that the authorities are very well equipped to deal with it no matter what comes. And she could have told us Danes that we are strong with the Vikings as our ancestors. But to protect the weak, she could have added, we should restrict our daily life for a couple of weeks just to be sure. In that case, she would have offered us an identity as invincible, and it might have calmed the panic, but I don't think Danes would have been motivated to stay home, which was the call to action in the PM's speeches. Because this identity as invincible calls for a completely different kind of action. If you think of yourself as strong and invincible, you continue like nothing has happened and don't seek shelter. So what intellectuals and academics have been pointing to the last 100 years is that the role or the identity offered by the speech to the audience position the actual audience towards certain kinds of action. That is, if the speakers succeed in offering an identity that the audience is willing to take on. Because having an influence on the way the audience understands itself in the speaking situation does not mean that the speaker can manipulate the audience into being anything that suits her and her message. You can't just enforce any identity on your audience. If the identity offered is too far away from what the individuals in the audience value and consider right and important, they will probably reject that identity and therefore be left.
I think we've got a technical hitch here, not something that World Speech Day is particularly used to having, that Meta seems to have gone offline. I don't know if she's going to come back to her. Oh, no, there's Sergey is there waiting manfully to take over if we can't have Meta.
Can you hear me, Simon?
Oh, I think we might have Meta back.
I hope you do. I'm sorry.
No, that's great. You might need to just carry on speaking. Your image is frozen for a moment, Meta.
Okay.
But carry on speaking, and we'll see whether it comes back.
I hope it does.
Yeah, because it was. The fact is, you were on a roll, and it was a fascinating kind of moment in your speech about creating audiences. So, you're back. That's wonderful, marvelous. Carry on, please, Meta.
Thank you. I think where you lost me might have been at the point where I was saying that we are back at the importance and the values and the beliefs that are held by the audience that I mentioned in the beginning of my speech. Yeah. To position your audience to act, you still need to pay attention to those actual members of your audience and what they consider important. An example of this is a company leader that might use public speaking to motivate her employees to support changes in the organization. She could, as the main reason for those changes, offer the perspective that it will increase profits of the organization. And thereby she would offer her employees an identity of being very much concerned about the increasing of profit. But if the employees don't value increasing profit that highly, they won't automatically identify with that position, even though it was offered to them by the speech. Instead, that particular leader should look for what is actually important to her employees and establish a connection between that and the call to action she wishes to make. Then she should offer the audience a position from where it is natural to act the way called for. And one way of doing that could be changing her main arguments. So the next time you prepare a public speak or a speech you're about to give publicly, you should do just that. You should make clear what your call to action is in your speech. And then you should explore what values such an action would arise from. And finally, you should match those values with the actual values of your actual audience. Because the identity you offer your audience might be the reason they respond to your call for action or the reason they reject your speech altogether. You can have the best arguments in the world, but if you don't offer your audience a position from where it makes sense to act on those audience, you won't be able to make the change that made you take the floor in the first place. Thank you, Simon.
That was great. Thank you, Meta. Well, I much enjoyed that because it's an area of public speaking that is so rarely touched upon. the notion of the audience. And I just wanted to ask a sort of personal question on it, really, which is something that's always of interest to me, which is that when somebody gets up to make a speech and there's a group of 20 or 30 or 50 or 2,000 people in front of them, they automatically think that those people are an audience. But actually, those people are not. They're simply numbers of people in the room. And the trick of public speaking, it seems to me increasingly, is to create an audience. So I wondered if you had any insights as to how a public speaker goes about creating an audience. One simple example might be humor. That if you crack a joke at the front of a speech, you get everybody to laugh. There's a kind of common activity. Everybody feels then part of the audience, and they react and respond in a more collective manner. And speech making is always about reaching out to the collective imagination, as you've said, to the identity, to the belief, to the collective. So if you had any sort of thoughts or elaborations on that, I'd find them really interesting.
In general, I think it's hard to give a recipe as to what to do. The example you just gave regarding the use of humor made me think that in that moment, when the audience starts laughing at something the speaker had said, they also, this is theoretically speaking, they acknowledge being addressed. They acknowledge being the audience to the speaker because they respond to what the speaker says. And I think that probably connects to what I just said, in the sense that in order to invite your audience to take on the identity, you need them to acknowledge that they are being spoken to, that they are being talked to. And one way of doing that is, of course, humor. Another way could be an advice that is as old as rhetoric itself is to seek commonplaces. So find something that the speaker and the audience have in common to once again acknowledge, have the audience acknowledging that they are being addressed and that they are your audience in this to this specific speech. So commonplaces, things that they have in value, things that the audience recognize. Those would be other examples and other advices in that situation.
Great. Okay. What about trying to create this notion of an identity or appeal to an identity in the audience? What are the kind of levers that you think are most powerful, most influential? Are they imagery? When you're trying to reach out to an identity, is that about imagery, or is it about just simple terminology, terms, words, or how do you think it works best?
The way I go about it, I have two things I look for. One is the arguments used. That was also some of the examples in the speech I just gave. So whenever you take some arguments, you emphasize certain aspects of the thing you're talking about, and ask people to agree that this is the way the world is and this is the way we're supposed to see the world. A different aspect is, as you said, the use of words, especially value-laden words that emphasize or should point to what things are good, what things are less good, what things do we want, and what things would we rather be without. And that is also, it's a lot about the subtle work of values that is being done in the very situation. And the values often come or are often showed in the arguments and in the value-laden words that we use.
Okay. Because one can think of some of the sort of darker moments of rhetoric and the use of speeches by dictators, where they try to create an identity in the audience which is very much polarized. They use us, they use us and them.
Yeah.
So we're good, they're bad. And one can think of all the way through Nazism, that was the kind of the leitmotif of how audiences were set up. We're good, the rest of them are a threat, a disease. So I wonder if you've felt that was kind of part of the art.
No, and I don't. And I think that what you're mentioning now brings us back to what the discussion you had with Tom before I went on air. Because you're right, it was language that created those movements and those collective identities that led to terrible things in history. And I always say that it doesn't take a rhetorician, it doesn't take a skilled rhetor to manipulate and to lie. the perspective I'm offering here is that at the same time as you can use these tools to do terrible things, it's also, to a great extent, a fact that as people, as individuals, we have all these different social roles. And what you can, if rhetoric is about finding the most persuasive things, the best arguments in every given situation, some of those arguments is also calling out different aspects of the audience's identity, reminding them what values they have and they might not have known, and use that as a basis for making them act.
Yes, exactly. It is always that conundrum of speeches being both a wonderful force for good and a potential threat in the wrong hands. It is kind of at the heart of the Aristotle-Plato discussion, whether we think they're a force for good or a threat. So the audience perspective is a fascinating one, and we could go on about it for hours, and I hope we will again, Mette. So thank you so much for your contribution. I've really enjoyed it, and such a fresh perspective on things, and thank you so much. Do hang around. I'm going to ask Sergey from Russia now to come in and talk to us about Russian rhetoric, which I hope will be an equally fascinating discussion. I think I pressed the wrong button to make Sergey the president. There we are. There's Sergey. Good morning, Sergey.
Good morning. Good afternoon. Actually, good afternoon, because we have GMT +3.
Oh, okay. So it's afternoon in Russia, anyway.
Yes, thank you so much, Simon, for inviting me for that wonderful, outstanding event, and to speak together with my colleagues from UK, Nordic Europe. So best regards from St. Petersburg, Russia, from St. Petersburg State University. As Professor Hemming will explain the geography of Ålands Islands. So this is Sweden, this is Finland, the islands are between them. So St. Petersburg is also somewhere between Europe, Nordic Europe, Eastern Europe, Asia as well. So that's a kind of mix of traditions. So we sometimes, I'm supposed to speak about Russian rhetoric, but we should keep in mind that in St. Petersburg, as a metropolitan city, it's more European city, the situation is different. So okay. I'm more involved into St. Petersburg style by trying to describe the picture, my version of the picture, how the things with rhetoric look like in Russia. So I'm associate professor of St. Petersburg State University. Unfortunately, the classes are cancelled due to well-known events, so we don't have students in the rooms. But I'm supposed that among the audience we have multiple students. My students from St. Petersburg, also other Russian cities, and Poland as well, because I'm working in Poland, and my wife right now in Poland, so Shula. So and we're separated because of closed borders. It's also interesting thing. So I'm doing debate, academic and competitive debate, for about 22 years, on both high school level and university level. So I was one of the pioneers of the academic and competitive debate program in St. Petersburg, in Russia. I'm still doing that. Besides, I'm lecturing in St. Petersburg State University. I'm professor of Eastern European politics. I'm teaching Polish, Ukrainian, Russian relations, and also worked as a political consultant for many years. So that's why I have the perspective, not only Russian version of rhetoric, but also Russian part as a big Eastern European tradition. So I would like to, for my 10 minutes or less than 10 minutes remaining, I would like to elaborate on three main issues. So first, the Soviet and the Russian tradition of rhetoric and public speaking argumentation, and then to compare the contemporary political strategies of the Russian politicians and the Russian opposition leaders and how the people, the society, and also copies those strategies, and also try to implement those strategies in their rhetorical and oratorical activity. So going back to history, well, it's interesting that many people in the West, they think that Russia is pretty straightforward and directly administrative country, when there is no room for debate for centuries, when the centralized power made the final decision and the civil society were remaining silent. But it's only partially true, because even if we remember the current Russian president Vladimir Putin recently has got a new nickname, the historian. Why? Because he's trying to teach history, to hold the history lessons, which outrage the neighboring country, Poland, Baltic states, Western European countries as well. So the question is Putin trying to be amateur or professional historian, or is he trying to revise and rewrite the history of the Second World War? So it's very, very popular to cite the historical documents and the excerpts from archives in Russia so far. So I found, by the way, an interesting document, which was issued by the Nazi Germany administration 3 weeks before the invasion to the Soviet Union. So there was actually a Ministry of Agricultural Food of Nazi Germany, and its state secretary issued a manual to the officials how to behave on the occupied territories. So let me 10 seconds quote from that document. An article and paragraph 8 of this manual for the Nazi German official, it says that please do not talk by act. You never out-talk Russians or persuade them by words. They know how to speak better than you because they are born dialects and inherited an appetite to rhetorical and philosophical exercise. Less words and debate with them. The main thing is to act. The only thing that could impress Russian is action, because they are by nature funny and sentimental. So by this quote is interesting that the Germans considered the Soviet people, well, in 1941, as I repeat again, born dialectics and inherited an appetite to rhetorical and philosophical exercise. So it's interesting why this reaction or this evaluation happened, but let me remind you that in the Soviet Union, despite the public discussion among the general public was not a common thing, the political and communist elite, the so-called nomenclatura, so the nomenclatura and party elite were trained and well prepared for the public discussion, for argumentation and logic. Why? Because they were considered themselves as the fighters of the so-called ideological warfare. So they were prepared in the so-called party schools and leadership academies, and they actually knew how to argue and how to present the evidence in favor of the eternity of the Soviet and the communist regime. So let me remind you that, for instance, when I was a high school kid and I was studying history, to my mind, when I looked through Joseph Stalin's manuscripts, pamphlets, as well as the executive order he issued during the Second World War, you face a modern version of the argumentation and logic we use in the higher education system in teaching those issues to the high school and university students. For instance, let me remind you a very interesting executive order from the Second World War that was 1 month before the Stalingrad battle. He issued the executive order number 227, the so-called not a step back, or in Russian, ni shagu nazad. So when it was introduced, the panel military units and also anti-retreat forces, but the question how he actually issued or how he wrote that executive order. And the first part of the document, he actually praises the Nazi Germany armed forces, the Wehrmacht, for their brilliant successes, and actually almost glorified them. It was 1940-42, 1 month before Stalingrad battle. So nobody except for Stalin could actually make such benevolent rhetoric in terms of the enemy. But then he said that those successes and those positive things they have should be copied, should be actually implemented on.
Well, it looks like we've lost Sergey for a bit. I suspect that's another glitch, just in terms of the connectivity. So I'm hoping that Sergey will come back and continue his speech. So we'll just give him a moment or two to see whether he's going to come back. I think he is. I think there's Sergey back. Yep.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. Well done, Sergey.
Sorry. The problem is connection. So,
yeah.
Well, going back, finally concluding the Stalin remark. So it was actually Stalin who inspired the population, the Soviet people, well, to think that there is no black and white approach. There is some positive things may happen, and they actually in the armed force of their current enemy. So, concluding the Soviet tradition, so this, but this was not allowed to everyone else. So, by average, to average Soviet citizens, which have their who discuss the issues and matters in the kitchen privately, but they could not do that public. So going back, say, but the Soviet elite were well prepared. And the Soviet party officials were definitely prepared in terms and well trained in terms of rhetoric and in terms of oratorical activity. So right now the situation has been changed because the society or the civil society, the regular people, they got the trainings of debate. So the debate program, the academic debate program in both high schools and universities in Russia, they exist for about 25 years. But the political elites right now is actually shows the lack of the capacities or different understanding of what rhetoric and oratorical activity means. So let me analyze the rhetoric of the current Russian president, Vladimir Putin. So he uses in his for 20 years, he actually became very, very popular due to rhetorical activity and due to his language and due to his speeches. So his speeches were considered 20 years ago or 15 years ago as the most popular thing on YouTube and also on Russian on different media platforms because of several things. Because the sense of humor, the specific Putin's humor, and if you watch those videos on YouTube with English subtitles, and even if you know the context of the speeches, of these jokes or anecdotes he makes, you as a viewer, as a Western public member, sometimes and very often do not understand why Russians laugh at that. The problem is that he sometimes uses very conservative, racial, and sexist jokes, which boost the enormous popularity among the Russian people. So we like those jokes, we admire that, and we think that it's a man of people, it's one of us. He's one of us. He's man of people. He's actually doing the same things as we. So he's not different from us. So that was also a good strategy for him to become popular. Second is secondly, he's using the very famous strategy in rhetoric. It's very typical in in Soviet and Russian discussions, which is called look who is talking, or in Russian it sounds even more harsh. It's "Sam durak," so you are idiot, or you are the disaster, like Boris Yeltsin said in the famous on a famous press conference with Bill Clinton in Washington, D.C. So it's actually look who is talking. So, or like The Economist 10 years ago said, it's a kind of whataboutism, or this famous Soviet joke of "Are you hanging the blacks?" So yeah, Václav Havel, the former Czech president, called it one of the commonly canonized demagogical tricks. So it was a Soviet joke, actually, when both Russian and American guys, they're just asking each other. Also, there is a version about the radio. The Voice of America is asking the Soviet radio, the so-called Armenian radio. So, is it true that the Soviet engineer earns 120 rubles a month? And in 3 days post, the Armenian or the Soviet radio has responded, "Are you lynching blacks?" So that's actually the trick, or that's actually the strategy. One, or him, I mean the Russian president, gives a response to any Western criticism by devaluation of the opponent, and actually by describing or satirizing the different aspects of their argument. So we constantly, if we are faced the criticism of human rights and economic reform or aggressive foreign policy, we constantly blame the respondent that, hey, what was your foreign debt? What are your policy? So it's not appropriate to teach us, because you also can be blamed for the similar things. So that strategy, look who is talking, or "Sam durak" in Russian, is very, very wide, well-known rhetorical strategy, which is used not only by the president of the country, but also by many officials and public figures on the public discussions. So second tactics he used, and also which is copied by the people and the public speakers, is the tactics of devaluation the sense of what the opponent says, or what the opponent claims. So the devaluation of opponent claims. So like, for instance, if we as a country or the government is blamed for biopolitics, or for aggressive foreign policy on Middle East or in Eastern Ukraine, so the answer is very simple. It's nonsense. It's, well, rubbish. It's ridiculous. So the first reaction is devaluation of the sense of the claim by our opponent, and the second, well, explaining that, well, just it does not have much sense to criticize from that perspective. So using the so-called nonsense, rubbish, trash, and other synonyms for Russian, чушь, бред, so вздор. So it's very, very much used, not only also by the top level officials, but also by many public speakers. What would you have from the opposition side of the house, from the Russian opposition? We've got the opposition leader of Alexei Navalny, who constantly, who is a prominent critic of Vladimir Putin policy, and criticized corruption, and also doing many videos, investigations against corruption. But what he actually uses, he's actually the popular video blogger, so you can watch his videos in YouTube with English, French, German subtitles. So it's actually, he's also open to the world. So he uses, as he looks like young Putin. So actually he also uses demagogy and also populism to attract the youngsters, the high school and university students. So uses very simple sentences like Donald Trump. So Donald Trump's ones. So 3-4 words, each of them. Uses very popular rhetorical forms of address among the youngsters. So actually trying to use this similar rhetoric as Vladimir Putin, but for different meaning and from different perspective. So it's interesting that even the opposition and the most prominent critics of Vladimir Putin, they actually copy his populism, but maybe not the contemporary one, but 20 years ago when he was young and active. So as in conclusion, so what is a sum up of what we have just talked about. So unfortunately, the Russian way of rhetoric and Russian way of public speaking reflects to great extent the strategies that are proposed from top-down approach, from above, from the popular or the well-known politicians or government officials or showbiz stars. So we actually try to copy the best, like we think, the best from them and apply those strategies and tactics in our real-life discussions, which sometimes are not a good idea because we copy not the best examples of oratorical and rhetorical activity. Second issue, our second conclusion, that there are some researches, and we do some researches, when in the public speaking of the leaders, the aggressivity or the verbal aggression increases. It also reflects the policies and also increases the aggression in the society. When we, like a sponge, we actually copy the negative trends and the negative aspects of the rhetoric and actually behave in a way like they say or they would like us to behave. So unfortunately, so that's a very sad tradition, and I should confirm that Russian society is dependent on this logic. The only positive thing, I should mention, is these high school students and university students, which are not actually indoctrinated by the public television only, and are doing debate programs, and they're involved in the debate programs in both high schools and universities. They have the injection, and they have the remedy, and we have the different models on different role modes, and they sometimes think that top-down strategies of rhetoric as conservative and morally outdated. So the final example is like last year on the meeting with the youngsters, with the high school students and Russian Tyumen region, which is in Siberia. So Vladimir Putin tried to use his typical sense of humor and asked Armenian boy of 13 or 14 years old, who is actually living in Siberia in Tyumen and origins from Armenia. So isn't it cold for you here? And the face of so the boy stunned actually and didn't know how to react. So what was the sense of question? Is it cold because you are an Armenian while you're living in Tyumen in Siberia? So it was a kind of misunderstanding of his jokes and the sense of humor. And that was actually a good sign that the youngsters, the young people, they actually apply and behave in a modernized way, in a modern way, than the conservatives trying to impose on us. So that's basically what we have just what I would like to share with you among the rhetoric from Russian perspective. So thank you very much again for inviting me, Simon, and best regards to the audience members from Poland specifically. Bardzo dziękuję.
Yes, well, thank you so much, Sergei. That was a wonderful kind of tour de force of what's been going on in Russian rhetoric, and I find it fascinating that the similarities between Putin and Trump, in a way, that they both use very simple levers, very simple jokes, a very simple kind of approach to being one of the people type speeches, which is a fascinating insight. And what do you think of the kind of new influences? You were talking about a kind of a change in young people. What are the new influences in terms of the way that they're approaching rhetoric and their outlook? Is it purely kind of online influences that are shaping a new generation?
Yeah, online influence matters a lot for that. So the language of our debaters, or our school debaters, or not only debaters, but regular people who are not involved into debate, is the language is becoming simplistic, but much more simple from one side. And my colleagues from the linguistic department, they do not like the text messages in forms of rhetoric, phrases, and sentences. But to my mind, as a debate teacher, it's also makes the language more clear. So they try to explain the difficult issues with very simple words, with maybe not so much sophistication, but at the same time, they trying to grasp idea very fast. So that's why it's both drawback and advantage while simplifying the language. Second issue is the youngsters, they have much more critical thinking approaches, and they are free from dogmas, from taboos, from kind of forbidden stuff the adults sometimes and very often try to impose on them. So they are much more free in terms of discussion, despite the society and the government tries to protect them and overprotect them from unwishful, unwilling information or unwilling data. So I think simplification, simplifying the language, and more critical approaches, critical thinking approach, not critical, but critical thinking approaches. Well, this is what makes the youngsters really remarkable speakers and participants of public discussions.
Thank you. Because obviously you have an expertise also in Eastern Europe, is there a kind of a different tradition between Russia and Eastern European nations such as Poland? Do they have a different kind of tradition of rhetoric and approach?
I think we have, well, my Polish friends will say that I think every person has her own view on that. Well, I think there are both similarities and differences. Regarding similarities, we both, I mean, Russians and Poles, we basically, and we very often make the very popular fallacy of appeal to authority. So authority matters for us, for both Poles and Russian. So we sometimes cite and quote the researchers, and without critical thinking and without thinking that the author may make a mistake, and we rely on authority in our public speeches. So that's what makes our rhetoric culture similar. Regarding the differences, well, I think while the Polish students, youngsters, they're much faster overcoming those barriers or those limits. They are faster becoming independent thinkers and independent arguers, not just copying the best ideas or the best arguments and actually paste them into their speeches by trying to think on the top, trying to think impromptu. So just try to make actually impromptu or extemporaneous speeches with no preparation time or with limited preparation time. We Russians, we are very much dependent on preparation time. So we do not like think and speak on the top, impromptu, extemporaneously. So we need some time to think, to organize our ideas, to organize our mind. So I think they're becoming much more impromptu than us.
Well, thank you, Sergey. That's been a wonderful review of Russian rhetoric. Do hang around for a moment or two. We might come back, but thank you so much for contributing from St. Petersburg. And it's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
And I'm now going to bring in Raheel Akhtar from Pakistan. I haven't seen Raheel for a while, but it's wonderful to see you, Raheel.
Hello, Simon.
He is a great supporter of World Speech Day. He's held some tremendous events in Pakistan, and most recently in Karachi, he was able to put up at very, very short notice a really, really excellent online program for World Speech Day in Karachi. And it's a pleasure to talk to you, Raheel, but also a pleasure to be able to get some of your insights from Pakistan on public speaking. I know you're a champion of public speaking, and just marvelous to have you on board and to get your perspective on rhetoric and public speaking from your part of the world.
Thank you so much, Simon, and I hope I'm loud and clear at your end.
Very much.
Thank you. It's been like what I think 4 years now that we are engaged with the World Speech Day activities here in Pakistan. Since the time we get to know about World Speech Day through our mutual platform called IDEA, and till now we have done some of the activities based on World Speech Day. This time it was different, as we told you before that we have planned a physical activity, we have planned an event at the venue, but somehow due to the corona breakout, we have to cancel that event following the government instructions from Pakistan. So after that, the team was very anxious. The team was very excited for the event. This is once in a year activity, so they don't want to miss that activity. So they want some kind of activity somehow on board of World Speech Day, so that in their mind actually is that if we don't do anything on World Speech Day, the WSD map will have a blank space on Pakistan, and that's what we don't want. So that's how they came up the idea on like I think 30 hours before 15th March, and they pitched me in that why don't we go for the online activity, because they have that in mind that when we started World Speech Day, if you remember, we collaborated with online television at that time, and the idea was to live stream all the events from all over the world. So following the same idea that we had 4 years back, they said that why don't we go for all in online activity, and we don't have any physical event, but we go for the online event. I said, okay, let's plan and let's see what kind of response that we can get. Surprisingly, we got a tremendous response from the speakers, from the people that we approached. And you know, the best part is that for the 6-hour-long live transmission that we had yesterday on World Speech Day Karachi page on Facebook,
yes,
we engaged people from Karachi. We engaged people who are Pakistanis, but now they are, the one speaker was from US. He is in US right now. The one speaker was from Canada. He is in Canada right now, and they joined us from there. So I think even if we go for the physical activity, we don't get that kind of variety in our event. Yeah. Secondly, when I checked, we closed the live transmission yesterday at around 10 p.m. Pakistan Standard Time, and when I checked at around 11:30 p.m. Standard Time Pakistan, it was around like 4,000 plus people have viewed that live transmission till that time. So I think we can't get that kind of reach if we go for the physical event. So after yesterday's success, the team is very excited now, and they are saying that we can have more kind of these activities on weekly or maybe monthly basis, and
Yes.
we can engage to the public speaking community within Pakistan and abroad Pakistan, in other countries as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, do you think that that's part of something that we should explore for World Speech Day, to have more ongoing speaker activities and to use more of this online technology to, you know, to have events like this where we encourage people from different parts of the world to contribute?
I think we should, because learning always increase when we get the exposure from other countries and what other people in their countries and their communities doing for the public speaking promotion, promoting activities related to debates and argumentation and rhetoric. I am engaged with Speak Smart, and we are running their one of the international office here in Pakistan. Speak Smart is based in Estonia. I have friends there. Margot is a very good friend. Helena is a very good friend. So they are running their chapter in Estonia. We used to like communicate at least once or twice a month, and we exchange the ideas, whatever they are doing in Estonia, whatever we are doing here in Pakistan, and that's how Speak Smart is growing on that pace that we are having right now. So I think it will be a great idea if we can collaborate in somehow. If we already have a WhatsApp group where all the national ambassadors are there already, but I think we need to know that, because the major challenge that we face, at least a country like Pakistan, or if maybe any country who are not a developed country but are developing countries, more focused of any activity goes towards the commercial side. Any activity that you're going for, people are more attracted towards what is the commercial aspect of that activity. Unfortunately, all the activities that we do related to public speaking or argumentation building or argumentation theory or rhetoric building, they are very less commercial activities. They don't generate any kind of revenue for now. So I think if we can get engaged with other people from other countries, that what they are doing in their countries and how they are sustaining their activities in terms of financials, I think we can get some learning, and we can implement those learnings in countries like Pakistan and Bangladesh and other countries, where we can implement those practices and we can see if they can work out for us as well.
Sure. Well, we'll explore that, Raheel, definitely. Now, just turning to Pakistan, is there, we've just heard from Sergey, and he's been characterizing public speaking and rhetoric in Russia and the kind of top-down approach. Do you think there are kind of aspects of rhetoric and public speaking in Pakistan that are specific? And I'd be fascinated to know what the kind of tradition is for public speaking in Pakistan.
Well, in Pakistan, as Pakistan is a kind of, in terms of population, it's a huge country. We are now like 220 million plus people. The city where I am based in is Karachi. People call it mini Pakistan as well, because in Karachi only we have around 3 crore people living in this one city. So this one city is larger than some of the countries of the world. We have a very active public speaking and debate circuit here in Karachi as well. We have another city in a province of Punjab called Lahore. They also have a very active debating circuit and a public speaking circuit. So within Pakistan, these are the two circuits which actually compete each other in competitions and in some other activities. This is very healthy competition, because every time when we have any international event, team from both of the circuits participate in those international events. So this the public speaking and the rhetoric community here in Pakistan is very kind of aggressive, but they are very much focused towards the on the competitive debates and competitive public speaking. For example, we have the circuit where we have students, people who are participating in these competition. They are starting from school, junior levels, and they go as higher as the university students. After the university grades, when these people pass out from the university, they either they have to sacrifice their public speaking career, or they have to sacrifice their debating career, and they go for the professional their jobs or their career as well. Somehow they can't carry both, because public speaking is not transformed into a full-time career till now here in Pakistan. There are people, there are companies, there are organizations who are working as a training companies, as a consultancy companies, and they do cater public speakers and debaters and rhetoric experts, but they are very less in numbers. When we started 3 years back, the Speak Smart here in Pakistan, our idea was based on promotion of public speaking and communication skills within the corporate structure of Pakistan.
Yeah.
Only in Karachi, we have around 5,000 businesses registered. Karachi is the hub of the overall Pakistan imports and exports because we are the port city. So we have so many companies based here in Karachi. So what we did is that we started pitching our training models, our argumentation models, our consultancy models based on communication skills and negotiation skills to these companies. And we asked them to get your people trained on these skills because there's this benefits that you can get out of this. So when we talk about the student circuit, that is very active. There are numerous kinds of competitions going around all 12 months here in Karachi and in other cities as well. Students are also traveling from one city to other city to just to participate in these competitions. There are educational institutes who are supporting these activities. They fund these activities. They fund their students to travel and to participate in these competitions. But as soon as these students pass out from the college or the university, they have a choice that they have to sacrifice these their public speaking and argumentation activities, or if they can carry on, they either go for some training company or some kind of companies like that who are focused to these activities. So I think this is the overall scenario. When we talk about the media structure here in Pakistan, which is very aggressive, very active, and very huge, most of the people who are sitting in media houses, in news channels right now, they are from the debating background. They are from public speaking background, most of them.
Right.
So all the mass communication departments in universities, all the journalism departments here in universities, they mostly possess people who are from the debating or the public speaking background. Okay,
so great. And how much a part of the fabric of life in Pakistan and communities is public speaking? Is it a commonplace activity, public speaking in groups and communities?
Or
more about?
I don't think it is not like that, because in Pakistan, usually the people who are elders, who are the former generation, they usually discourage having debates among the communities. Debate is actually a negative term used here in Pakistan. Argumentation is actually a negative terminology used here in Pakistan. People very openly say that don't argue, don't debate, just agree to what I'm saying. So usually people here have a very different concept of argumentation. They don't, because why they are saying this? Because argumentation is not what argumentation actually is here in Pakistan.
Right.
There is the actual argumentation what you and I practice in our circuit is very different.
Yeah.
And when it goes only for criticism and no constructive criticism, that's kind of debate that we have here in Pakistan. That is why people think that it's toxic. People think that it's negative. People think that it's destructive. It's not constructive, and that's why they discourage debates here in any community. Although the educated communities, the schools, colleges, universities, they wish to have these dialogues. They wish to have the panel discussions. They wish to have these debates within their institutions. They promote these kind of activities, but still we have so much to do to make people understand that what argumentation actually is, what rhetoric actually means, what public speaking can do with the lives of the people. So there is much more to do here in Pakistan.
Fantastic, Raheel. Well, that's been a fantastic review, and I again congratulate you on a really excellent live stream program yesterday, a real insight into the way that public speaking can go online and be just as persuasive and immersive as being a live event. And maybe we're going to go forward with both types of event and have never lose sight of the live event, but also have the broadcast event as something that backs it all up. So
yes, and I must say that as a number of people are online here right now, all this activity is not possible because without if somebody can't initiate that. So Simon, thank you for initiating this concept some years back, and thank you for reaching out to people all across the world. Thank you for building this platform, and thank you for taking it forward every passing year. It is tremendous. It is very supporting, and it's, you know, when we know that somebody is there taking care of the whole activity from some other part of the world, and still the activity is going on, it's morally very supportive. It's actually very supportive that, okay, if we can do, somebody is there to pat our back, somebody is there to give us appreciation and the best wishes. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Raheel, and it's been marvelous to talk to you this morning, and we'll be in touch again very soon. Thank you so much.
Very soon, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to me, and that's just about concluding the first program on rhetoric. I hope you've enjoyed the different speakers from different cultures and backgrounds. I think it's been a fascinating brief review, because of course in just 2 hours it seems there's so many more things that we could have elaborated on, but it's been wonderful, and thank you so much for listening. There is a second rhetoric broadcast at this afternoon at 4 o'clock GMT, and we'll be back in touch then. So very good to speak to you, and